Former President Donald Trump said he wasn't sure if Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was running for president in 2024. According to an interview with The New Yorker, Trump said, "Well, I don't ask him. It's his prerogative. I think I would win." However, Trump may be at odds with his donor base. According to Politico, 10 donors who contributed over $20 million to Trump's campaign have recently funneled over $3 million to DeSantis. New polling shows that most Americans don't want Trump or Biden back in the White House.
CEO of Status Coup, Chariton, and founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, Adam Coleman, are with us to discuss. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Jordan, is this just that thing where Republicans, Democrats, corporatists all across the board often just give to both candidates, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on or what have you, to make sure that, you know, they have a seat at the table no matter who wins?
I think there's a little bit of hedging their bets, like you're saying, going on. But I do think in terms of the Republican donor base, a lot of them see DeSantis as basically Trump in terms of the return on investment they would get without the headache, without the crazy tweeting. He's definitely a much more intellectual version of Trump, actually understands policy, cares about policy, even though I don't agree with his policies. So I think definitely hedging their bets, but also there might be a considerable portion of the donor base that would prefer a competent, less headache-inducing version of Trump.
Yeah, Adam, it seems very clear to me that so much of the conservative, the donor base, the intellectual class, conservative media, which never, they only embraced Trump when they had no other choice, when it was clear that's what their viewers wanted. Those people obviously are going to prefer DeSantis in a head-to-head matchup. So then the question becomes, in my mind, how much of advantage DeSantis there, but then now it obviously matters hugely what the base wants. But if the base is pretty evenly divided between the two or likes them both, then DeSantis is going to win in a head-to-head matchup.
Yeah, I agree. Based off of, just my personal interpretation, it sounds like to me that the average Republican or right-leaning person or just moderate would far more appreciate DeSantis in office than Trump. Even people who had voted for Trump have a little bit of a sourness when it comes to him, even if they agree with some of his policies. They don't really like the rhetoric. They don't really like how he constantly fell for the media's traps. He was his own worst enemy, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that I think he was overall a bad president. I just think that he was extremely complicated and he made his job more complex than it needed to be. I think DeSantis is a far more sensible Republican. He's actually a conservative, which conservatives actually appreciate. And I think he is, like you said, more of the intellectual type, more of the say something when he needs to say something, stay quiet when he needs to stay quiet, and not just run off just to run off as far as his rhetoric. So I think the typical American would far more appreciate DeSantis in office.
I mean, this is a big gamble given how passionate folks are in Trump's base. If there were an awareness that people were kind of splitting the difference this way, giving to a potential, Ron DeSantis, supporting a potential Ron DeSantis presidency, I do think might trigger some latent Trump enthusiasm that has been depressed now that he's off Twitter and less in our public eye. I wonder if the kind of the choice here will become more divisive going forward. Jordan, I wonder, do you think substantively on the issues this is going to be at all what affects people's decision making, or is it all going to be about their public persona, whether or not they seem sufficiently populist, who is going to be able to out-populist the other one? DeSantis being a Yale graduate and Harvard Law graduate, are these things you think going to come up in this?
Yeah, respectfully, I completely disagree with my comrades here. I think Trump would defeat DeSantis, and I don't think it would be particularly close. Trump, you got to remember, and I covered both Trump campaigns across the country. There's a pro wrestling aspect to why people like Trump. There is an entertainment factor. Yes, policy, but there's a large portion of the Republican base that see Trump as still politically incorrect, anti-establishment. DeSantis has a little bit of like the Hillary Clinton circa 2012, high approvals as Secretary of State, but once she enters the race, everything tanks. I see that with DeSantis. He has only had to really have the pathetic Florida Democratic Party as his competitor. Once he enters the race, a lot of this culture war stuff, he'll get points for that. But I mean, Florida's economy is not so great. Between property taxes, rent is unaffordable, housing is unaffordable, inflation is higher than the national average. And according to a New Yorker profile that kind of went in depth about DeSantis, people say he's aloof. He doesn't have interpersonal skills. He doesn't really make eye contact with his staff. He's awkward in social conversations. I think that stuff pops out in a national race against Trump, who obviously would have a name for DeSantis, and I think make DeSantis look kind of small. So I don't think the overall Republican base is looking so much for an intellectual version of Trump. I think that's more donors, maybe the media.
Jordan, you're definitely not crazy. I thought probably as recently as January, February, I think I actually made a bet then that Trump would be the next Republican nominee again. And at that point, I did not think it would be anyone other than Trump. But in the last few months, it seemed to me, I get a sense that the Trump fever is breaking just a little bit, that DeSantis really is benefiting from tons of favorable media coverage and is also broadly well-liked in a way a lot of these other figures. Yeah, maybe when he goes head-to-head with Trump, that will change. I don't think it will be an easy fight for him. I think if they both run, the 2024 primaries is going to be like a repeat of Hillary versus Obama, where it's like a really drag-out fight to the end. But we'll see, and we'll be talking about it until then, because that's what we do. The Washington Post reports that Floridians, however, are in favor of the Governor DeSantis' response to COVID. Most recently, the governor blasted the FDA for being in bed with Big Pharma, which they are. And some have pointed to the fact that unlike most politicians, he's still paying off student debt, doesn't trade stocks, clocks in at the lower end of the wealth bracket compared to most presidential candidates.
Yeah, he's got all that law school debt. Relatable to DeSantis. If we look back to why Trump won, it's because he at least postured as a populist, anti-establishment candidate that people wanted over Hillary Clinton. In light of DeSantis' background, do you think he could become that anti-establishment candidate over Donald Trump? Despite this pedigree, we know it's not about pedigree, right? Because, right. Trump has his own, Wharton and stuff in his background. It's all vibes. It's not at all about what's on people's transcripts. Who do you think can out-populist the other? I'll go to you, Jordan.
I think Trump, even though it's complete nonsense that he's not a populist, would still out-populist DeSantis. I mean, it doesn't get media attention, but DeSantis, he's your usual Republican. I mean, he's given close to $1 billion in tax cuts to corporations. He loved Disney and showered them with breaks before they, the crime of coming out against the Don't Say Gay bill. He's got kind of that pedigree of Ivy League schooling that is, I don't know how you spin that as populist. And contrary to his, I'm fighting Big Pharma, he rakes in money from Big Pharma and other big donors. So Trump presumably, would run again in the primary, self-funding to a certain degree, and use that over DeSantis.
Adam, do you think what DeSantis has done with COVID is an advantage to him? Because I know actually a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservative media folks, really, really liked the DeSantis approach to the pandemic, defended it, et cetera. An approach that was obviously wanting to get vaccines distributed, but no mandates of any kind, even going so far as to not allow I think cruise lines to even private institutions to require mandates. So do you see the COVID question as a kind of advantage DeSantis scenario?
Yes, actually I do. Talking to Trump supporters, actually one of the things that they really disliked about Trump was 100% behind the vaccines, while many of his supporters are actually very skeptical. I've even seen where he had rallies and he mentioned the vaccine and the crowd's voice would kind of shake and murmur because they're not 100% behind it, but Trump is he wants to take credit for everything that he does. and everything that he does is perfect. So he's never going to back down from his position of furthering the vaccines and believing that the vaccines are an ultimately good thing because he was involved with it. If the tables were turned and it was somebody else, if it was Biden who pushed for the vaccines, Trump would likely say the opposite. So I in no way think that Trump believes that the vaccines are an ultimately great thing, that everybody should get it because he actually thinks it's a great thing and everybody should get it. I believe he likes the win. He believes that's a win because anything that was accomplished under his term is considered a win in his eyes. Whereas the Republican voters, or just the moderates in between, the Trump supporters, are very skeptical about the vaccines. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe that Trump was in full support of the mandates. I think that down the line, people wanted to make sure that this was a choice for people. So the mandate part is a little bit different, but as far as the vaccines and thinking that the vaccines are a godsend brought to us, Trump is all behind it, and I think that really turns off a lot of his voter base.
What a fascinating tee-up to have Donald Trump potentially saying, you know, I'm proud. This is my vaccine. I did this. I cured America. And look what happened in Florida. Look how many people died in Florida. It's one of the worst states for deaths because of Ron DeSantis, and have another Republican arguing, the opposite. And then also have Donald Trump potentially attacking DeSantis over, hey, I know real estate. I'm so good at real estate. It's impossible to buy in Florida. It's impossible to do these things in Florida. And having those kinds of issues really vetted and before the public within a party in the way that we so rarely have. It could be, I think, an interesting kind of reorientation of what the ideological groundings are within the Republican Party. So I appreciate both of you joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.